I'm 78 years old, and when I was 15, I gave birth in a pigsty. The church door in front of me is heavy, older than my bones, and it sighs when I push. My fingers close around a rosary I've worn smooth with worry. The beads tick like a small clock waking up. I take the third pew, the one that remembers me, and let the cold wood steady my spine. Breath in, breath out. Names I haven't said in decades press up against my tongue like strangers at a locked gate. I won't dress it up for you. Rain came sideways that night. The roof argued with the wind. There was straw, a torn blanket, and my stubborn body refusing to vanish. I held a life smaller than my hunger, warmer than my fear. I did not die. That was the smallest miracle. The larger ones came later wearing plain clothes. A door opened without questions, water placed in my shaking hands, a place to sit where sitting didn't hurt. If silence were safety, I would have been safe long ago. Instead, silence kept carving me thinner, year after year, until even my shadow looked starved. So I'm here to tell it true, before the dark gets any bolder. I am 78, and at 15 I crossed a river with no bridge and no witnesses, only God, the night, and a child who taught me how to breathe again. If you're hearing me now, hold my hand for a minute. Where are you watching from a kitchen table, a bus seat, a sofa with a blanket over your knees? Phone light on your face. Or a big screen filling your room. Type a city, a county, a corner of the map. Not for the algorithm, for the roll call of the living. I want to know where this story lands, and who is breathing with me in this quiet church, while the door sighs and the beads keep time, and the truth finally steps into the light. When I was 8, the earth smelled like warm pennies and wet clay. I could tell the hour by the way dust sat in the window, a bright river that never touched the floorboards, only hovered there, polite. We ate from a chipped wooden bowl that had a bite taken out of its rim. My favorite seat put that bite at my left hand, so my spoon could rest in the scar like a tiny boat. I thought that was how bowls were meant to be, a little broken, a little faithful. Our village road knew our names. You could walk it barefoot and read its story with your feet. The flatter stones at the bend where the neighbors argued, the shy grass that clung to the ditch, the soft patch near the well where the ground forgave you for being tired. It was 1957. I had a dress that belonged to a cousin before it belonged to me, and then would belong to another cousin when I grew taller. We traded buttons like secrets. We patched elbows with old prayers. My father smelled of soap and horses. He could lift me by the waist and make the room swing without moving a single chair. When he laughed, the air turned generous. He showed me the photograph on the altar, him and my mother on their wedding day, and told me, each time as if new, that promises are just rope unless you learn where to tie them. He tied his to our doorway every night when he came home and unshouldered the day. Inside our house, the radio cracked like a dry twig, and my mother hummed the rest. She had the sort of voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. Her hands were always full, corn, thread, worries, yet she touched my hair as if both of us were birds she might startle. My brothers moved through the rooms with a different weather. Boots louder than necessary, knuckles declaring sovereignty over the table, a privacy that taught you not to look too long. They weren't villains then. They were just taller, and the doors seemed to swing wider for them. Poverty was a teacher with poor manners, but it taught. I learned to listen for the kettle's soft complaint before it boiled, to mend by lamplight without stabbing my thumb, to stretch a story over an evening until it fit everyone on the mat. We had enough to be grateful for, and not enough to be proud of. That balance felt holy, like the space between a candle and its flame. Winter took my father the way the tide takes a footprint suddenly, and also after a lifetime of coming and going. First came the malaise, the cough like a drawer that wouldn't close, then the sudden stillness, as if the room had forgotten how to breathe. I remember my mother's eyes asking questions that words couldn't bear. The neighbors filled our kitchen with soup and silence. The priest came and left. The house made a new sound at night, a long, settling sigh. It was 1959 or maybe early 1960. Dates blur when grief is a weather you wear inside your coat. After the funeral, the wedding photograph looked heavier on the altar. I started straightening it every morning, as if it had learned to lean. The chipped bowl moved to the middle of the table, promoted to something ceremonial, proof that you can keep serving after you've been bitten. We ate slower. We spoke quieter. My mother's humming folded in on itself, a smaller bird. Men know how to fill a room. Boys learning how to be men sometimes fill it with noise. My eldest brother, Sebastian, discovered a new height in his voice. The house tilted toward him, just slightly at first, then more. He brought home rules like stray dogs hungry, insistent, sniffing everything. Curfew, chores redistributed, doors to be kept shut, words to be kept shorter, laughter to be kept rare. My younger brothers copied his footsteps the way a pond imitates the wind. If you asked what changed, no one would say power. They'd say responsibility, and set their jaw just so. My mother became a shoreline where waves arrive, where nothing arrives intact. She didn't argue with Sebastian. She learned to nod at the right times, to soften the edges so the rules didn't cut me when I carried them. At night, I could hear her moving through the rooms like someone reading by touch. The click of a latch, the sigh of a chair, the prayer that trembles when it meets a memory. She was not absent. She was present in the way rain is present everywhere, but you still can't hold it. I started visiting the well alone, bringing home water that tasted like rain left in a copper cup. On the path back, I counted my steps, not for the number, but for the calm it made. 1, 2, 3, each a thread I could throw across the day. If I came home to quiet, I knew I had time to finish my mending. If I came home to voices, I knew to make myself smaller, to slip into the corner of the kitchen where the cat slept and the walls remembered gentler conversations. Grief rearranged our furniture without asking. Chairs that used to face each other now faced the door. The radio became a stranger we tolerated. The nights got longer by an inch you could feel with your hands. I learned the price of looking, how sometimes a glance is an invitation, and sometimes it is a flag. My father's photograph kept leaning. I kept straightening it. We were both practicing. That was the year I understood that a house can love you and still hide corners that don't. That was the year I learned to hear a boot before it turned the handle, to hear a sentence before it had a subject. I was 10 by then, maybe 11, counting birthdays by hems let down and sleeves let out, by the gravity that took hold of my name. Childhood didn't end with a door slamming. It ended with the soft sound of a latch closing. When people talk about turning points, they like miracles and fireworks. Mine was quieter, the chipped bowl in the center of the table, my father's photograph refusing to stay straight. My mother's humming thinning to a thread you could barely see. The house tilted. We learned to walk at an angle. At 12, I learned that a house can speak in two voices. In the morning, it was the voice of warm bread and a kettle clearing its throat. By evening, it was the creak of a floorboard that meant wait or hide or don't be seen counting. The air itself kept track of where I stood. A gap opened between the day I thought I lived in and the day I actually lived in, and I balanced on that gap like a tightrope with no net. Sebastian began collecting rules the way other boys collected coins. He didn't announce them. He dropped them on the table and watched how they shone. Doors to be kept shut. Windows opened only 2 fingers wide. Speak when you're holding a chore. Be quiet when your hands are empty. Laughing is fine if it starts with him. Questioning is not fine if it begins with me. Curfew bent with his mood, like a branch obliged to follow the wind. He didn't need to be cruel every day. He only needed to be possible. Possibility does the rest. The first time I reached for the back door before finishing the dishes, he set the wooden spoon down so carefully it made more noise than if he had slammed it. "Habits," he said, as if we were discussing table manners, not freedom. "Habits, Esperanza, make or break a person." Sebastian liked to dress force as wisdom. He could smooth a command until it gleamed like advice. My younger brothers, watching him, tried on the same polish. Boys practice on what's near, the way a knife practices on the vegetable before it meets the meat. Our lone light bulb in the kitchen hung by a wire that remembered brighter days. Its yellow made silhouettes out of us, turned the edges of people into fog. Under that light, the table became a border crossing. On his side, boots, elbows, the easy sprawl of someone who trusts space to accommodate him. On my side, smaller breaths, smaller gestures, the mathematics of not spilling anything that could be called attention. The chipped bowl our veteran of hunger occupied the center like a peace treaty no one intended to honor. Mother learned the choreography of not making things worse. She met the evening at the door with a neutral face, as if emotion were an item that might be taxed. Her hands, good hands, hands that could coax beauty out of thread, stayed busy enough to look harmless. When Sebastian made a rule, she nodded as though he had just prevented a fire we hadn't seen. Later, when we were alone, she tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear the way you mark a fragile page. "Don't climb the air," she whispered once. "It won't hold you." I understood. Survive now, ask later, if later comes. I acquired the habit of listening through wood. A door can be a wall or a drum, depending on what you need it to be. Boots in the yard meant I should finish faster. Boots in the hallway meant I should become furniture. Voices at the threshold had temperatures I could feel through the floor, Sebastian hot and forward, Antonio gusty and uncertain, Jose all echo, Francisco trying on seriousness like a hat too big for him. I studied them as if my breath depended on tomorrow's exam. School was not a refuge, exactly, but it was a place where my name wasn't a lever. I loved the smell of chalk, the smug authority of a correct answer. When the teacher asked for volunteers, my hand flew up like a bird that didn't know about windows yet. I stayed until the last bell, pretending to be helpful so I could wash the blackboard and drag my feet. The road home was short and long at the same time. Every step had a number, and every number had a wish attached. 1. Let the mood be soft. 2. Let the door open to quiet. 3. Let me be uninteresting enough to pass. At 13, I discovered how objects remember. The back door lock stuck halfway when the air turned damp. If it slid open smooth, the evening would likely follow. If it choked and clicked, something else would catch too. The loose tile by the stove scolded you if you made a mistake. The curtain above the sink trembled whenever the kitchen kept a secret. I kept my own secrets in motion, braiding them into chores, letting them ride the rhythm of sweeping, giving them the errand of counting beans into the pot. Secrets behave better when they have work. Sebastian learned to pace. Pacing is a language. Forward and back, claim and reclaim. He practiced it like a sermon with no congregation, a map of ownership traced into floorboards. Sometimes he didn't say a word. Quiet is a tool when you know others will sharpen it for you. We sharpened it. We filled silence with our guesses, then obeyed the guesses, then scolded ourselves for guessing wrong. Control doesn't always announce itself. Often it coaxes you to build its throne and then thanks you for the chair. Mother's silence turned from wool to burlap. It's still covered, but it's scratched. When I leaned toward her with a question, she met me with the kind of softness that deflects rather than absorbs. The one time she spoke plainly that year, she did it while folding laundry so it looked like any sentence might follow. "Be where you can be," she said, eyes on a hem. "Don't be where you can't." It sounded ridiculous and also perfectly clear. I wrote it down later on a scrap of paper and hid it inside the binding of my prayer book. In those months, I grew without noticing. Dresses shortened, sleeves turned sincere about my wrists. Childhood loosened its grip like a knot, deciding whether to hold. I was not unhappy every day. Some days the sky minded its own business and the chores lined up like ducks, agreeable, domestic, almost kind. On those days, I let the radio sing without correcting its crackle, and I dared to hum along. I spoke to the cat like she knew what law governed our kitchen. She blinked, and in her blink I pretended to see permission. But nights trained me. The door would open. The yellow light would flare. The room would wait to see which voice of the house we were getting. Sebastian might explain a rule as if I'd asked for it, using my name like a doorknob. Or he might pass by with the kind of silence that scrapes paint. I learned how to make myself small without appearing to shrink. I learned to stand where a shadow already existed so I wouldn't create a new one. I learned that fear becomes efficient with practice. By 14, I could hear footfalls before they committed to a hallway. I could tell who was coming by the length of the pause before the latch. I could feel my own thoughts line up like soldiers and then desert when they met a glare. The house didn't need locks anymore. It had us. We had learned to behave like hinges turning exactly as far as someone else's hand allowed. There are homes that never need to lock their doors because the people inside have already learned to keep themselves shut. At 15, the body becomes a rumor before it becomes a fact. Mine did it quietly, like a letter slipped under a door at night. I woke one dawn with a new heaviness in my belly, not pain, not hunger, just a different gravity, as if someone had moved furniture inside me while I slept. I folded my hands over it the way you calm a skittish bird. Then I stood, and the room shifted, and I knew the bird wasn't skittish. It was here to stay. I kept working. Chores are good at pretending nothing is happening. I fetched water, and the bucket bit my palms the same as always. I swept the kitchen, careful around the loose tile that scolds. I set the chipped bowl, our old veteran, at the center of the table so the house remembered itself. But around midday, when I bent to lift the pot, a small wave went through me. Not pain, but a warning that would grow teeth later. I leaned against the counter until it passed, breathed into the shape of it, and told no one. Late afternoon turned the window to syrup. I sat where the sun likes to rest and pulled the old blanket across my lap, the torn one with the soft middle and the stubborn edge. I pressed it against my stomach and counted threads. The blanket knew how to keep a secret. It had been holding our winters together since before I was born. Under it, my hands learned a new prayer, not for rescue, but for steadiness. Some people love with music. I loved with counting. The first test was the mirror. Ours was small, honest, and unforgiving, a gift from an aunt with sharp eyes. I faced it sideways, then straight, and told myself that the dress was to blame. I let the belt out one notch and pretended that was a style. The mirror did not agree or disagree. It did what mirrors do. It returned exactly what you gave it. I tried again the next morning and the next, feeding it different arrangements of hope. It kept returning me to myself. Mother noticed the appetite before she noticed the curve. "Your sugar is running," she said gently, sliding another spoon of beans onto my plate. She had a way of turning suspicion into kindness, as if she could smother a spark before it met the dry field. "Eat. You're still growing." I ate. She watched without watching, and I let her because being seen that way did not hurt. It was the other kind of seeing I dreaded, the kind that interrupts you mid-breath and asks for an explanation it has already decided to doubt. Sebastian did not look for changes in my body. He looked for changes in my obedience. He liked his rules tidy and his proofs immediate. When he listed chores, I recited them back perfectly and then performed them faster than he expected. Precision is a disguise. If you do everything exactly right, no one examines what you choose not to do. I learned to avoid lifting heavy pots when anyone was watching. I learned to walk the long way around a question. I learned to take up the exact amount of space that causes the least conversation. School measured me in other ways: papers, sums, dates, and those measures hadn't shifted yet. I was still good at the chalkboard. I could still make a sentence stand on both feet. But I began staying closer to the wall when the bell rang, letting the corridor empty, letting the laughter pass like a weather vane twirling in someone else's wind. On the road home, I watched the shadows of the trees on the dirt, the way they lifted and set, like hands practicing blessing. I wanted a blessing that didn't cost me my name. In the evenings, when the kitchen became a border and the light took its yellow shape, I moved more slowly. It was not laziness. It was self-preservation disguised as care. I discovered the pace at which the room didn't jolt. I discovered which shelves complained and which ones conspired. I learned that tea cools to drinkable in 6 verses of a hymn if you sing under your breath. I started choosing cups by weight, steadying my new center against the table while I poured. Secrets teach you engineering. The second test was the calendar. I kept mine on a scrap of paper inside my prayer book, hidden where only pages could find it. I counted days the way sailors count stars, not to be right, but to avoid being wrong. When the tally refused to add up in the old way, I stopped adding and started preparing. Preparation is its own kind of hope. I boiled water each afternoon for the vegetables, and tucked away a clean rag for the floor, and saved a bit of salt for the stew. It felt like putting coins into a jar no one else could hear. Every small act said, "I believe you, I believe you, I believe you." Behind the house, the old pigsty leaned into the field like a man who has told all his stories and is waiting for the punchline. I started visiting it in the late light, ostensibly to fetch kindling. I'd stand at the doorway and smell the old straw and the older rain, and imagine a different kind of room. A temporary one, borrowed from the past, where the future might arrive undisturbed. I wasn't romantic about it. The place was ugly and true. But ugliness can be honest when honesty is all you have. Mother watched me in fragments, a hand on my shoulder when she passed me the knife for the onions, a glance when I steadied myself on the counter. Once, she reached to brush a crumb from my dress and let her palm rest there a second too long. Our eyes met. A world of grammar opened and closed between us. She did not ask. I did not answer. Sometimes love refuses to interrogate you because it knows what questions can do. At night, my body talked, and I learned to listen without fear. A flutter low and secret, a tightening that visited and left. I put my hand there and whispered a simple roll call of what I could promise. Air, water, warmth, a name. Names mattered. I had been carrying the names of others my whole life. Father, mother, brother, God like stones in my pockets. Now I began making space for a new stone I didn't have yet. I stroked the old blanket, rehearsing its new job. The blanket said nothing, but it agreed. The third test was shame, and it arrived wearing familiar shoes. Shame likes to flip the map so you think the road home is a crime. It whispered that I had broken some invisible law. It suggested that silence was not only safer, but noble. But whenever shame got loud, I pictured a child trying to breathe underwater. That picture rearranged my spine. Shame is a poor midwife. I sent it outside and latched the door. I planned without paper. Who would I tell if telling ever helped? Maybe the woman at the well who spoke less than water. Maybe the nun whose hands looked like answers. Maybe no one, if nobody could be trusted with a soft thing. I thought about doctors as rumors more than people. I thought about the priest, and then I didn't. I thought about God and tried not to confuse him with the men who liked to pronounce him. In the end, I chose a plan that required no permission. Gather what I can, learn what I must, and be ready when the hour comes. Days did their stubborn work. Laundry, floors, beans, bread. The world pretended not to notice my secret, and I pretended not to notice its pretending. My brothers stayed noisy in their lanes, rules polished, boots loud, the house tilting to accommodate the weight of their certainty. I learned to enter a room the way fog does, not asking, not announcing, simply being where the air already is. When they spoke, I listened for the weather beneath the words. When they paced, I counted, not to obey, but to chart the distance between their steps and my breath. Then came the morning. Mother put a small bowl of water on the table without explanation. It was our good bowl, the one we reserved for guests, the one that made ordinary things behave. The water shone like a patient eye. "For the bread," she said, though the dough was already rising. We held each other's gaze long enough to call the truth by its first name and then let it pass, like a neighbor you greet without stopping. I dipped 2 fingers in, touched my wrists, and felt cooler. The bowl stayed. It became a lighthouse that only we could see. I began speaking to the child out loud, not with words exactly, but with breath shaped like words. The cat approved. She curled at my feet and pretended to be uninterested while keeping exact watch. In those murmured minutes, I discovered I could be brave in syllables too small to register as rebellion. "We are going to make it," I would tell the air. "We are going to meet. You are not a problem to solve. You are a person to welcome." Saying it didn't make it easier. It made it truer. Trouble prowled the edges of the days, but it did not enter every one. There were afternoons when sunlight made the table handsome and the radio behaved like an old friend, and I could feel the world's ugliness waiting outside like a strayed dog that had temporarily found something else to bark at. On those afternoons, I hemmed a dress that wouldn't fit me much longer and let the seam run a little wider, as if generosity could be sewn. I tucked the old blanket into the bottom of my trunk. I boiled the kettle for no official reason. I said the names of the saints who had forgiven more than I was asking to be forgiven for. When the first undeniable sign arrived, a shift so clear that even the mirror bowed to it, I did not collapse. I stood straighter. Fear prefers you bent. It trips less that way. I rolled my shoulders back and felt the small new life answer with a ripple, a knock from the inside, the gentlest insistence I had ever felt. "All right," I whispered, and the room agreed by not disagreeing. I filled the good bowl with fresh water, set it near the blanket, and counted the breaths between that moment and the next. Somewhere in the house, a boot crossed a threshold. Somewhere else, the radio cleared its throat. The world continued, as if it didn't know we had already crossed a border. I understood then that secrecy and silence are cousins, but not twins. Secrecy can be strategy. Silence can be surrender. I would keep the one that kept us safe and abandon the one that buried us. I would hold my tongue where it protected, and I would use it where it healed. I would tell the truth in pieces, to the right ears in the right rooms, at the hour that did not expose a child to the cold. That night, as the yellow light drew its small circle on the table, I made a promise without witnesses. I promised the child warmth, and a name chosen with care, and a world that might not deserve us but would still have to make room. I promised myself not to disappear just because disappearing was expected. I folded the old blanket once, twice, and laid my palm on it. The fibers held the warmth like a secret kept on purpose. I did not ask permission. I did not ask forgiveness. I asked for strength, and then I behaved as if I had it. The house could list to one side if it needed to. I would learn to walk at that angle and carry what was mine. I was 15, and I was not alone anymore. That was the beginning, not the crime. Rain came slantwise the evening the hour chose me. 1965, the kind of storm that teaches roofs their manners. The sky dragged a chair across the clouds and sat down hard. I felt the first true grip low in my belly, no rumor this time, no shiver pretending to be a breeze. It was a hand that knew my name from the inside. I steadied myself on the counter, counted 10 breaths, and then another 10, not to stop anything but to welcome it without shaking the cup. I moved the way a person moves when a house is listening. The kitchen had ears, the hallway, eyes. Sebastian was out. My younger brothers were arguing about nothing in the front room, voices bright enough to miss what wasn't theirs to notice. Mother was folding towels with the concentration of a surgeon. She lifted her head half an inch when I passed. Our glance was short and complete. She did not ask. I did not explain. "Take the old blanket," she said softly, "and the bowl." The good one. The water was already cooling inside it, a small moon on our table. The pigsty waited where it had always waited, leaning into the field like a tired shoulder, wood gone gray with honesty. I slipped out the back, the rain making a shawl of my dress. The ground received me without complaint. Each step rang a bell inside me that no one else could hear. When I reached the door, it resisted on principle, then opened with a sound like forgiveness. Straw held the ghost of animals and their ordinary lives. I was grateful for their ghosts. Ordinary is a kind of blessing. I set the bowl where the light from the crack under the roof could find it. I spread the old blanket, the stubborn edge at the top, the soft middle welcoming the rest of my decisions. A nail stuck out from a beam like a warning. I turned the blanket to hide it from my eye. The knife lay where I had left it days ago, wrapped in a strip of cloth. Not sharp, not proud, just a tool that remembered work. I did not admire it. I acknowledged it, the way you nod at a stranger on a bus who might be important later. The next grip arrived and then the next. Waves with a message and no interest in poetry. I met them knees wide, forehead to wood, hands planted in straw that tried to be a pillow. I let sound out in pieces low, private, the kind you would mistake for prayer if you wanted to. Time unbuttoned itself. Minutes stopped arguing. The rain kept time for us, steady as a metronome. Between the waves, I checked the bowl, touched the blanket, told the little life we were almost to shore. "We are doing this," I murmured. "We are still we." Pain is not a villain in every story. Sometimes it is a midwife that refuses to leave early. It asked for my breath. I gave it. It asked for my fear. I placed it on the shelf above my head, the one with the cobwebs, and told fear to mind itself while the adults talked. I said names, the ones that make a person sturdier, my father's, my mother's, the child's not yet chosen name. God's when I could manage it without confusing him with anyone else. Each name was a handhold. Each handhold held. When the push came like a verdict, I obeyed it. The world narrowed into a bright corridor and I walked it without shoes. There was the burning that promises an end, the stretch that makes room for a future. And then the quiet between thunder and thunder's echo. In that quiet, a weight left me and entered the air, and then there was a sound like a bird realizing it has a voice. Small, fierce, new. I laughed. It came out as water. I gathered the child to my chest, a warmth that made the storm reconsider itself, and wrapped that warmth in blanket and breath. We were both slick with work and triumph, and the straw had the good manners to stay still. I checked fingers, toes, the soft slope of a forehead designed for kisses. I counted again, not because I doubted, but because counting can be love when you don't have other language left. The cord tethered us, humming its old song. I unwrapped the knife and looked at it the way you look at a fact without romance, without apology. My hands were steady from a lifetime of chores. I tied what I had to tie, the way my mother taught me with onions and thread. I cut what I had to cut, not to sever, but to begin two lives that could face each other. The knife did its job and forgot us the way tools should. No flourish, no blood-warm adjectives, just the work, and then the proof of it. Two bodies breathing. The storm quieted, as if it had come to an agreement. I placed the child against my skin and felt our hearts learn a duet. The bowl of water reflected us in a crooked circle, a halo borrowed from practical things. I dipped my fingers, touched the child's forehead, and said a name that might change later but was perfect where we were. "You are here," I whispered. "You are here, and I am here, and the world will have to make room." Mother's face appeared in the doorway like a candle that had learned patience. She said nothing. She moved carefully, as if the air had turned fragile. She checked what needed checking with the brisk tenderness of someone who has survived many rooms. She tucked the blanket's stubborn edge under my shoulder and pressed my hair back so I could see the new person better. "All right," she breathed, not a question. We were 3 then, and the pigsty understood enough to keep our secret for another hour. I felt the aftershakes, the body's way of tidying up what it had opened. I let them pass without bargaining, the child rooted with the competence of someone who has always known more than I do. My fear climbed down from the shelf and, finding itself unnecessary, went outside to get rained on. I closed my eyes for a count of 20 and opened them to the same miracle, behaving as if miracles were daily. We did not celebrate loudly. We recognized. There will be cake some other year, I thought. Balloons are for people who trust the weather. For now, there was this. The warm weight on my chest. The sound of rain learning to be small. The smell of straw admitting its purpose. I was 15 and more than 15. I had crossed a border without guards and stamped my own passport with breath. I did not die. That remains the smallest miracle. The larger ones were already lining up in ordinary clothes, a door that would open, water that would be offered without questions, steps that would carry me out of this shelter and into the next chapter without dropping anything we could not afford to lose. I had won a battle. The war unknown, uninvited, inevitable waited outside, patient as weather. I held my child closer and decided that patience would have to wait on me. He was 3 months old the morning the house decided what kind of house it was. Sunlight spilled through the curtain like it had business here, and my boy laughed at it, open-mouthed, unafraid, the way new people bless the world by mistake. I was humming nothing special when the front door bucked against the frame. Boots, voices, the quick, efficient weather of men who have already chosen an outcome. Sebastian didn't shout. He didn't need to. He crossed the kitchen like a border he had drawn himself, read the room with a scan that skipped Mother and landed on me. "We're helping," he said, the word shaped to sound like virtue. My younger brothers gripped the edges of chairs, trying on sternness like a suit borrowed for a funeral. I gathered my son, and the baby gathered me back, fingers closing on my dress as if they knew what was coming. What came was a sequence, memorized long before it was performed. A hand reached, a body pivoted. A door opened not to let us out but to prove it could. My mother's voice rose and fell like a sheet shaken over a bed useful, late. I said no, not with volume but with insistence, the kind that makes a person's name heavier than it looks. Someone said mine, someone answered with his. And then my child. My child was in Sebastian's arms, a bundle redefined by distance. "Just for now," he said. And that sentence is the dirtiest trick cruelty ever learned. It pretends to be a bridge. It's a cut disguised as a promise. The door closed on sunlight that suddenly didn't know where to go. My knees negotiated with the floor and chose surrender. I heard myself make a sound I had never practiced. Mother pulled me up by the shoulders hard enough to keep me in the world. "Breathe," she ordered, as if breath were a chore and I was late for it. I followed them into the yard because the earth under my feet still belonged to us, and belonging counts for something even when it doesn't. "Please," I said, the word tasting like tin. My son answered from across the space with a hiccuping cry that found every door in me and opened it. Sebastian turned his back, which is a theology some people live by. If you can't see pain, it owes you nothing. The others flanked him, learning the posture of a wall. The gate clanged. The road took them. I stood in the aftersound, holding the outline of a weight that refused to vanish. Mother's hand landed on my spine, steady, urgent. "Not here," she whispered. "Not under their rules." She pressed a cloth into my palm, water cool, clean, and pointed past the well, past the field, toward the line where the town becomes someone else's. The cloth was both permission and a map. I ran, not like a girl who hopes to win a race, but like a mother who refuses to lose the only thing that admits the weather changed. The path blurred into angles and choices. Fences presented themselves as questions. Thorn bushes argued without persuasion. In my chest, my heart climbed a ladder and forgot to climb down. I promised aloud what I could. "I'm coming. I'm coming. I'm coming." Promises are a kind of oxygen when the air is not yours. Somewhere between the field and the next field, pain found me new pain, the kind that speaks in a different grammar. It pressed and released, pressed and released. A fist, learning it had fingers. I stopped behind a stone wall and bent forward, palms on the rough forehead on the cool. The world tilted, the sky leaned. A warmth ran down my legs that didn't belong to rain. I understood without looking, the way a bell understands it's been struck. No dramatics, no speeches. Just the body finishing what the body cannot carry when grief takes the other arm. I held the wall and counted until counting could stay on its feet. I whispered to everything that wasn't staying. "I'm sorry. I love you. Forgive the timing." Then I washed my hands with the last of the water and kept moving, because moving was the only verb that didn't lie. By dusk, I had no plan left, only direction. The town's edge gathered into alleys that knew anonymity by name. I followed the smell of soap and old wood until a small chapel appeared, shy and certain. The door gave under my weight with a tired kindness. Inside, cool air met my skin like a hand that had done this before. I took 3 steps and sat hard on the nearest pew, the wood remembering all the other people who had arrived with nowhere else to put their names. A woman in a plain dress older than my hope, younger than my fear, came from the side aisle with the soft speed of someone trained for emergencies that won't introduce themselves. A rosary at her waist clicked once, like a lock opening. "Water," she said to no one and to me. Another sister appeared with a folded towel, the kind clean enough to change a day. No questions first, no ledger, no doctrine louder than mercy. Hands under my elbows, a cup to my lips, a blanket over my shaking, not to hide me but to keep me. "Your name?" the first one asked when air made room. I gave it, and she repeated it as if testing a bridge. "All right, Esperanza." All right. I believed her because her voice made room for the part of me I'd left on the road and the part of me that had been taken at the gate. She looked toward the door, as if expecting weather to change its mind. "You're safe here for now." For now. Said honestly, the words are not a trick, they are an island. I let my head rest against the pew and watched the ceiling's cracks sketch a map I would learn later. My body cooled around the edges. My lungs remembered their instructions. Somewhere in the dark beyond that door, boots would still be measuring rooms. Somewhere, a baby would be looking up at a ceiling that didn't know his name. But here, a small, deliberate kindness was building a raft under me plank by plank. Water, cloth, prayer, human hands. I didn't sleep. I let myself be kept. When the bell rang for the last office, I flinched, and then didn't. A candle guttered, the flame choosing to hold. The sister with the rosary returned and sat at the end of the pew, not touching, not leaving. "Tomorrow," she said, not a promise, not a threat, just a direction. "Tomorrow we will see." Tonight, we were surviving. Sometimes that is the holiest verb. 1969 began with a bell. It wasn't louder than other bells, only more honest. I woke on a narrow bed in a room with 3 other girls and a crucifix that watched without accusation. The sheet was thin but clean. The window squared a piece of sky and divided it neatly. The convent had a way of making every ordinary thing behave. If you set a cup down, it stayed where it should. If you folded a towel, it looked like a decision. They called us postulants, first those who ask. I had been asking my whole life, just not with words anyone could accept. Here, asking had a schedule. Rising at 5, prayer at dawn, work in the hours between. We learned the geography of quiet. The chapel smelled like beeswax and wood, warmed by witness. The rosary hung at my waist and clicked like a satisfied clock when I walked. I liked that the beads didn't ask for eloquence, only presence. I could give that. Sister Concepcion took me on like a thesis she believed in. Her hands were competent, like they had been argued into kindness by years of practice. "We don't erase our lives here," she told me on the second week, holding a basket of carrots the way you hold a small argument. "We compost them." She set the peels aside for the garden and handed me the knife. "You'll be surprised what grows." Work braided the day, laundry that steamed like forgiveness, floors that wanted to be known by a clean rag, soup stirred to persuade stubborn beans to cooperate. Nothing grand, nothing loud. But each task had a beginning and an end, a boundary that didn't move when someone frowned. After a life of dodging tempers and anticipating boots, I found relief in the dictatorship of ordinary chores. A floor doesn't get jealous. A pot doesn't disagree. The bell rang. We obeyed, and obedience here didn't shrink me. It held me up. In the afternoons we studied scripture, yes, and also anatomy of the heart as a moral muscle. We learned the difference between silence and secrecy. Silence, Sister said, is the room where truth puts on its shoes. Secrecy is the room where fear does. I copied that into my little notebook with the same care I reserved for names and recipes. The notebook became a map of new country. What to do with anger, feed it honest work. What to do with grief, give it a chair but not the whole table. What to do with joy, trust it even when it arrives at a bad time. At night, when the other girls slept, I practiced breathing like a person who doesn't owe the dark anything. I'd count 5 in, 5 out, and picture my son's face not as a wound, but as a window, something that lets light through both ways. Loss tried to creep in with its old sales pitch. I told it I'm busy. Tomorrow. Then I put my hand on the prayer book the sisters had given me brown cover, pages that rustled like leaves, and let the paper anchor me to this version of the world. Novitiate came another bell, another beginning. We traded our clothes for habits the color of practical storms. The first time I put mine on, the cloth felt like a promise I could hold. Vows were still ahead, but discipline was now, and discipline is a kind of shelter when it's chosen. We walked the garden paths in pairs, naming herbs, memorizing the places where the ground pretended to be level and wasn't. I learned the weight of keys, the small authority of opening storerooms where flour waited like snow you could eat. Sometimes I saw Sebastian in a stranger's posture and felt the old hinge in my chest creak. The convent didn't exercise the past. It gave it less furniture. When fear knocked, the sisters didn't shame me for answering the door. They stood behind me and asked the fear to show identification. "You can stay if you behave," Sister Concepcion told it once, as if fear were a visiting cousin. "Otherwise, the garden needs your energy." On feast days we sang, "I don't have a singer's mouth, but I have a singer's thirst," and the notes obliged. My favorite hymn rose soft and sturdy, like bread that knows what to do with heat. I imagined my voice traveling the same roads I once ran, finding the old pigsty and laying a blanket of sound over its honest wood. I imagined the songs slipping under doors I no longer had to open, telling the rooms I survived, "She's all right. She's working. Leave her be." By 1973, vows waited like a calm shore. I spent the night before in the chapel alone, the candlelight making modest halos of the floor. I thought about the words I would say, and the words I would not say. Obedience, chastity, poverty, big nouns, often mispronounced by people who have never had to lean on them. For me, they meant this: I choose a life that can't be bought. I choose a love that doesn't require disappearance. I choose a freedom that looks like service when you're standing outside the door. When the morning came, I walked down the aisle on legs that remembered running and chose not to. The veil settled less a curtain than a wing. I spoke the words. They were simple and stubborn and mine. Afterward, the sisters folded me into their congratulations the way they fold linen, firmly so it won't come undone by accident. We ate cake that tasted like ordinary sugar blessed by patient hands. I laughed, and my laugh didn't flinch at the echo. Healing didn't crown me. It taught me chores. It taught me to lay out my hurt on the line where sun could see it. It taught me to feed children who didn't know my name yet, to tend beds that someone else would sleep in and wake safe. It taught me that dignity is a daily, not a ceremony. I carried my rosary like a compass, my notebook like a spare heart, and when night pressed its ear to our walls, I did not bargain. I slept. The past did not vanish. It changed its posture. When I met it in a hallway, we nodded. "You're not my master," I told it. "You're my history, and history, when told true, stops being a chain and becomes a path." In 1975, I inherited a hallway, 12 doors, 32 beds, a blackboard with yesterday's spelling still ghosting the surface. The orphanage was a house with big ambitions and bad knees. It wanted to be safe, but didn't know the steps. I knew the steps, or rather, I knew the opposite of them, and that is sometimes how a person learns choreography. I put on my most forgiving shoes and began. The children arrived like weather sunny, startled, thunder tucked under their shirts. Some were loud because silence had betrayed them. Some were quiet because noise had. I learned their names twice, once from their mouths, once from the way their shoulders rose when I called them. "Names are doors," I told the staff during our first meeting. "We will knock before entering." I wrote it on the blackboard and didn't erase it for a week. We made a map of ordinary safety. It looked like a schedule. Breakfast that tasted the same on Tuesdays as it did on Fridays. Chores sized to hands. Study hour with pencils that didn't break at the first hard thought. We hung curtains that closed properly. We labeled closets so secrets had no reason to hide there. We put night lights in the hall that didn't blink out of spite. I built a rule I could defend with my whole name. No adult is ever alone with a child behind a closed door. If a door must close, a second adult stands in the hallway with eyes that can count to 60 without looking away. The city sent inspectors with clipboards and complicated eyebrows. I met them with ledgers that told the same story each month. Food in, food out, school attendance, medical visits recorded without euphemism. I wasn't there to impress them. I was there to make sure the children's days couldn't be edited by someone else's temper. Systems are love-wearing work clothes. We taught language for the body. "Where does no live?" I asked our class of 8-year-olds. They pointed, throat, chest, stomach, knees. We practiced saying it without apology, quiet first, then louder, then in a whisper that still counted. We made a game of leaving a room. Find the light, find the friend, find the grown-up who knows your name as if it were a fragile thing. I posted phone numbers near every telephone in lettering, even the shy kids could trust. We rehearsed drills the way other houses rehearse songs. Courage improves with repetition. Some afternoons I sat on the steps and repaired shoes. Worn soles told me more than intake notes. You can read a life by the places it has given way. I learned who tiptoed, who dragged, who ran, who stood their ground. We fitted new heels and called it a sacrament. "These are for walking away when you need to," I'd say, and the child would grin as if handed a passport. We made a code phrase for danger that sounded like housekeeping so no one had to shout. We chose spare blankets because every room understands winter. If a child said, "Sister, do we have spare blankets?" every adult in hearing became weatherproof in under a minute. Doors opened, eyes found eyes. Whatever was heavy put itself down. We practiced until the question felt ordinary and the response felt inevitable. Word got around that our house was boring in all the right ways. Boring is an achievement when you've come from chaos. Children grew fractions taller. Teachers from the public school sent notes that said things like steady, improving, asks for help. On Sundays after Mass, neighbors brought fruit and opinions. I accepted the fruit and let the opinions air themselves out on the steps until they forgot to be important. By 1979, our blackboard had more recipes than rules. Pancakes for birthdays, lentils that didn't taste like apology, cocoa rationed just enough to be special. I learned to fundraise without selling our dignity. I learned to read budgets the way I once read the weather, which clouds were a threat, which were only theatrical. When donors came to tour, I didn't show them our need. I showed them our competence. People fund competence. Need makes them sad. Competence makes them generous. Years turned like pages you don't have to lick your finger for. The children became teenagers who promised to write and sometimes did. New faces filled their beds, bringing fresh storms and fresh sunlight. I kept the ledger of goodbyes alongside the ledger of expenses, because both are the price of a house that keeps its promises. In the early 90s, someone from the ministry wrote my name on a list that reached farther than our street. Policy people wanted to know how our boring house did what it did. 1992 to 1997 became a second education. I sat in rooms with officials whose shoes never met soap the way ours did and learned to translate. What we call bedtime, they call routine adherence. What we call no closed doors, they call two adult protocols. What we call tell the child the plan, they call informed consent. I wrote guidelines that could survive a cabinet change. I argued for training that didn't end when the seminar did. I said safeguarding until the word wore a groove in the table, and then I said it again. Children are not grateful to be safe, I told a committee once. They are busy being children. That is the point. Someone in a suit shifted like their chair had learned a new truth. We built frameworks that outlived the meeting. Complaint pathways that didn't dead end at the person being complained about. Background checks with teeth. Unannounced visits that were actually unannounced. We added consequences that didn't require a scandal to activate. I kept a copy of every draft because paper forgets faster than people admit. Back home, the blackboard kept its job. New staff learned to read it like scripture and grocery list combined. I still mended shoes on the steps some evenings, still taught 8-year-olds where no lives, still taped phone numbers near the phones. Large work is a stack of small work done on time. When reporters came for a quote, I gave them one and then walked them down the hallway slowly so they could hear what safety sounds like. Laughter that doesn't flinch, doors that close and open for the right reasons, a nightlight that never blinks in the middle. If you ask what I am proud of from those years, it is not the certificates in frames or the polite clapping in conference halls. It is the ordinary Tuesday at 9:17 p.m. when a child rolled over in bed and did not brace. It is the 17-year-old who handed me a letter of acceptance to a training program and said, they asked for references, so I gave them a house. It is the staff member who squeezed my shoulder after a drill and whispered, spare blankets, just to prove the system still worked. I did not become a different person. I became a person scaled to fit more rooms. My history didn't vanish. It put on an apron. The past taught me many languages. In those years, I chose to speak the one that builds. In 1987, I met Sebastian on a street that hadn't rehearsed for us. No music, no witnesses who knew our names, only afternoon light and a curb that needed repair. He looked older in the ways that matter least, grayer, heavier, breath clouding before his mouth. My body remembered everything without asking my mind's permission. I let it remember and did not let it steer. He started with my name like a key that used to work. The sound fit the lock and did nothing. I kept my hands at my sides, palms open, as if holding two small birds I refused to drop. "I am not here to trade injuries," I said. The sentence had been practicing for years in the chapel, behind the laundry, inside my ribcage. "I am here to remove your shadow from my future." He tried a shrug, then a smile, then the kind of apology that asks for a receipt. I did not purchase it. I did not inventory my pain for him. I did not tell the story to make his face change. I told it like a ledger balanced in front of God. Plain, complete, zero flourish. When he reached for any version of control tone, distance, timing, I let it miss me. I watched him notice that there was no room left in me to colonize. "I won't be your secret," I finished. "And I won't be your witness either. I will be my own narrator." The words didn't taste like victory. They tasted like clean water. He nodded as if to end a conversation he had never begun, and stepped back into the life that had taught him the wrong arithmetic. I walked the other way, not lighter, not heavier, truer. Years gathered, and with them pages. 1999 to 2001, I wrote the book that would not let me sleep if I didn't. I kept the language unarmed. I placed every object where it belonged: the door, the bowl, the blanket, the knife, which is to say, the choices. I wrote to put a fence around memory so it could stop wandering into traffic. When the book found readers, they sent letters addressed to Dear Courage. I wrote back, Dear Neighbor. Courage is too proud. Neighbor keeps the kettle on. Illness arrived in 2010 with its bureaucratic paperwork and its honest fatigue. Breast cancer taught me a new liturgy. Scan, wait, breathe, bless the technician, bless the chair. I wore a scarf the color of stubborn peaches. In mirrors, I met a woman I respected, a face edited by necessity. Eyes that had nothing left to prove to. Healing came on its own timetable and demanded no audience. In 2015, an award with a title longer than my arm landed in my lap, shiny as a new coin. I accepted it for the children and for the boring rooms that kept their promises. Then I went home and hung my scarf on the back of a chair, opened my notebook, and wrote one more ordinary paragraph. Survival is not a headline, it is a practice. I did not forgive to be noble. I forgave because I refused to live in a house built by my enemy. The past still knocks. I meet it at the door with hospitality and boundaries. We share a glass of water. It leaves before dark. I am 78 now, and the world fits more kindly than it used to. Mornings begin with a kettle and a window that refuses to rush. I sit in the third pew when I visit the old church, the wood remembering my weight like an old friend who doesn't ask for explanations. The rosary in my hand is smooth from years of being believed. I don't race the silence anymore. I let it walk beside me and carry one end of the story. When I think of my father, the chipped bowl, the pigsty, the knife wrapped in cloth, I don't see a museum. I see tools, proof that the ordinary can hold a miracle without breaking. The past still knocks sometimes, certain it knows my address. I open the door with good manners and better boundaries. You can sit, I tell it, but you don't get the chair at the head of the table. It behaves if I give it a task. Water the garden, file a paper, teach me patience one more time. Most days I work in small rooms where big things happen. A girl learning her power to say no without apology. A boy trusting a door that opens when he knocks. A new staff member practicing how to listen without being hungry for the spotlight. I write their first names on an index card and tuck it in my prayer book, letting paper do what paper does best, remember, without drama. If you are watching this from a kitchen table, a bus seat, a quiet room that understands you, hear me plainly. Safety is not a favor someone grants you. It is a right. If you need help tonight, reach out where help lives: your GP or local services, your trusted teacher, your helpline. Tell one person who knows how to hold a secret without burying you in it. Then breathe. Then eat something warm. Then keep the light on long enough to see your own face and call it yours. My story is not a warning or a weapon. It's a key. Use what fits. Leave what doesn't. The rest can stay with me, here in this pew, where the door sighs, the beads keep time, and the truth stands without armor and still stands.